Well, good morning, everyone. Good to have you with us. I know some folks are still joining. We are happy to have you here at the Signatory webinar. Welcome today. My name is Kristen Hammett, and I am the Director of Ministry Services. And today we're going to be talking about the coronavirus, fundraising, and major gifts, how your ministry can thrive in times of uncertainty. I know we have all been reading up and brainstorming and considering our options during this time. So we hope today will be a continuation of that conversation, and it is so good to have you with us. What a whirlwind it has been. This is certainly an extraordinary time. So we want today to be valuable to you. I'd encourage you to use two logistical pieces and two tools that we have available to us. The first is the chat function, and that chat function will be used really primarily by us as we're asking for feedback throughout today's presentation. I will perhaps ask a question and ask you to respond in that chat function. So think about the chat function as how you communicate back to, or how we're going to ask questions of you, and you can give us quick responses. And if you want to initiate communication, you'll use that Q&A tab. And ask us some questions. We will be trying to answer as many of those questions as possible today, and we want to certainly make this relevant for you, but we know that some of those questions will be asked during the course of the presentation, and others we will wait for the end, and potentially others still we will respond to after the fact. But we do invite your questions. We do want to make today practical for you. I know one question that always comes up in these webinars is this PowerPoint going to be available later? Yes, it will be. In fact, we will send a recording of this webinar to you. So take some notes, certainly, but know there will be an opportunity to go back and connect with us and connect with this material after the fact. All right, let's test this chat function really quickly. I'd like to know, to begin with, how you're feeling. Are you anxious? Are you confident? Are you hopeful, fearful? Why don't you just give me one word, gives us an idea of where you are out there and how you're feeling relative to this unprecedented time that we're in. See lots of hopeful, curious, expectant, eager, inspired, at peace. I love that. Hopeful. Very good. Thanks, guys. Keep that coming. This is a perfect way to interact with us and help us to know how you are feeling. I love that you're hopeful and optimistic and confident. That tells me that you, along with us, agree that we serve a great God who will provide for us. Here's what I know. We have folks joining us from small organizations and big organizations, folks that serve in their communities locally, and those who serve well beyond our borders and around the globe. And I want you to know that wherever you find yourself today and however you're feeling today, you are welcome here. We want today to be relevant to you, and we want you to walk away with some practical tools. So who are you hearing from today? Who will you be hearing from later? Well, my voice and how I introduced myself earlier, I'm Kristen Hammett. I am the Director of Ministry Services here at the Signatory. My background is in development. I've also done some consulting, but my heart is for the work that you're doing. When you are connecting God's resources to his work, that is an exciting place to be. So thank you for doing that work. I will also throughout today then be facilitating the conversation and the questions. As Bill High is our primary speaker today, he will be sharing from his authority in the generosity space, his experience with major donors, and his insights into the market. He has helped to facilitate nearly $3 billion in kingdom giving. And he invests his time working with ministries, working with families, working with individuals and financial advisors. So we are so happy that he's able to carve out some time to be with us today. So why this webinar? Clearly, we are in crazy time. This is unprecedented, extraordinary, and we want you to know as the signatory that we are here for you. We are here to equip you and to partner with you. We really want to connect God's resources and generosity to help solve the greatest problems in the world. And you are the ones solving those problems. You are the ones on the front line. So we're here to equip you, and we're here to partner with you. We're also here today to address your concerns and your fears. I know that I've been on different webinars and in different conversations with ministry leaders, even this week, and I know there's some fear out there, and there are some questions about where to go from here. So we want to help you navigate that uncertainty and help guide you in that way. And then we want to provide you with some practical steps. This is not just about theory today. In fact, this is practical information that you can leave today feeling equipped to go do something. We want you to take action. And then finally, we want you to identify and capture the opportunities that do in fact exist in this volatile market and uncertain time. So before we jump into our agenda, I want to share just a little bit from my heart to you. You know, I've been spending some time in Joshua over the course of the last week in my quiet times in the morning and in my scripture reading time. It's really amazing to me how God can literally pull words off of the pages of scripture and make them incredibly relevant to the time that we're in. So I'm going to take just a minute to hopefully encourage you in that way. In Joshua 3, just as the Israelites are preparing to cross the Jordan and take the promised land, Joshua they stop on the east side of the Jordan, and he says, you will know which way to go because since you have never been this way before. That's relevant, right? We've never been this way before. And then he says, consecrate yourselves because tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. There's a lot of hope just in those two pieces of information. We have not been here before, but we know that God will do amazing things. And as you continue to read in Joshua, I just want to encourage you that how he does amazing things is when the Israelites take action. Whether it was marching around a wall or trapping kings in a cave, God delivered people into the hands of the Israelites when they took action. So find encouragement in those words today. First of all, we have not been here before, but we know God can do amazing things, and it requires our action to go do something, to share the good news of what is happening in our organizations, and God will do great things. All right, with that, I want to pass it off to Bill. He's going to walk us through kind of what to expect relative to our agenda items today, and then jump right into content. Again, share with me any questions that you have on the Q&A tab and engage with us on the chat.
Thanks, Kristen. It's Bill. Hi, I'm here in Kansas City, and we've got a full agenda for you, but we promise you that we'll get you out so you don't have to spend all afternoon or all morning, as the case may be, with us. But really grateful for this. We, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, actually, I was still out on the road traveling and talking, and you could see I was out all week, and from the beginning of the week to the end of the week, you could see the mood in the airport changing, and you could see the mood of the people that I was with changing. It started out that there were questions and concerns to the point of real worry that we saw. And then even the week after that, as I started to be on the ground more, we started getting some of those phone calls and questions, and some of that from the nonprofit world, but some of that from the donors that we work with as well. And so as a result of that, we said we really need to have a way to minister to some of the nonprofits that we work with. And so that's why we're having today. So here's some of the issues that we want to cover for you. We do want to give you a little bit more background information on the COVID-19 virus. but then point to some of the larger structural issues that are really taking place. And then from there, we'll turn to some of the more practical issues. We're going to give you some practical tools about communicating about what's going on, some of the tactical fundraising things that you can do, but then also how do you actually capture major donors and major donor gifts. Kristen will close it out with some of the next steps and resources. So that's what we're going to do. Let's jump right in. So first, we want to give you some information about COVID-19. And in particular, the reason why we want to do this is that as you go through this webinar, you're going to see that we're going to encourage you to have some strong outreach to your donor audiences. And we just think it's really important that you be a person that understands what the issues are so you can speak to it, because everybody has questions right now. They're all raising the same questions. And if you just started a conversation with what's going on, then that's going to get things going. So here are the issues that are happening right now. So the COVID-19 is, just to put it in perspective, in this year's flu season, we'll expect to see 15 to 25,000 people die just from the flu. There would be another whole number of deaths that would be related to pneumonia, but this is not the flu. It wouldn't be fair to put it into that same vein. But here are the basic issues that are going on. And one is simply that there's been a longer incubation period. And so people can walk around with this and not know it. One of the important things, by the way, about that is the fact that there's probably some people that have had it and didn't know it, or had very little symptoms from it. And so it actually may skew some of the numbers that you see later to lower rates. So the second issue there is that there has been, at least what we know today, a higher infection rate than typical flu, and then a higher hospitalization rate. The death rate depends on which numbers you're looking at. Again, the death rate, if you take into account that a lot of people have had it that maybe didn't even know about it, the death rate number actually may be much smaller. But at least based on the numbers from the World Health Organization and the CDC, they're saying that it's higher than the flu. So all those issues are saying, hey, let's pay attention to this COVID-19 issue. And then at the end of the day, the really big issue is that it's the hospitals that are being overwhelmed. It's the number of ICU beds, the respirators, and the masks that are the biggest concern. This is not the kind of thing where the death rate is so high that people are saying that we're going to have a massive problem like some other past kind of diseases and illnesses. So those are really the issues that are going on. It's this longer incubation period, the higher infection rate, which has all produced a whole set of potential treatment kind of options. And so the public health measures have been said, well, let's flatten the curve through social distancing, less travel, control your cough and sneeze, the hand washing, and the travel bans. So those have been all things that have gone on. But again, back to those four basic things that we talked about, those are the things that are really going on. And at the end of the day, as we begin to go forward, here's three scenarios. Now, by the way, if you look at some of the news going on, my practice is to take a look at CNN, and then I take a look at Fox News, and you get some perspective of what's going on by just comparing both. But one scenario, and this is not just me talking, these are other folks out in the industry who are on both sides of the fence, would say one scenario is that we may see some positive news come out of this. And that positive news could be the form of some positive treatment, or it could be this flattening of the rate in other countries as well that would give us some hope. That scenario one is a short window. If that happens, then we're going to see things begin to rebound pretty quickly. You've already seen some of that with just even the news of the stimulus bill and the positive impact that that's had on the stock market. Scenario two is actually probably the most likely one, and that is the idea that with time, with warmer weather, with the social distancing measures, is that we'll see the flattening of the curve. Now, again, I think right now we're in this season in the United States where we're going to be, the news isn't going to be very good for certainly potentially the next week or so. We'll see how it all pans out. But even with scenario two, again, the industry experts that I've talked to have said with scenario two, what that time frame is, if that's June, July, we're likely to see again the market rebound and the economy pick back up. Scenario three is certainly the darker one, which is that there are longer term problems and maybe there's a recession. And some of the darkest news that you'll see is this is an 18-month window where this would continue on. Again, we'll have to wait and see how some of this pans out, but those are the three potential scenarios of what's going to happen. Most of the folks that I'm talking to and the industry experts, some of the people in the financial services world still say it's probably scenario two. At the end of the day, again, this is the issue that's going on, and it's this public health issue versus the economy and the markets. And I'm not trying to weigh in on either side of that. I'm saying this is what they're trying to balance. Do we shut down our country in favor of the number of people going into the hospital and the like? Do we lose jobs? Do we lose wages? And then what's the cost of those lost employees? One of the realities is that if you continue to lose some of those employees, it's hard to get them back. And then how do you restart the economy? So that's the balance that's going on. And that's why you see President Trump, like him or not, pushing to say, let's open back up business here in the country by April or by Easter. So those are the things that they're trying to balance, again, in light of all the things that are going on. So that's big picture perspective. I want to take back one other step and go back a little bit deeper with you to a higher elevation and say that this COVID-19 is actually just pointing to some of the larger structural issues going on in our country. And there's two big issues that are going on. First is a demographic issue, which I've talked about in a book that I did with Ray Gary called Charity Shock. But at the end of the day, on the demographic issue, what you see is this huge concentration of wealth in the war generation and the boomers. That's the good news, by the way, for all the nonprofits here with us today. But they're beginning to lose some political power, and they're losing it to the coming generation, the millennials and Gen Z in particular. And one of the things that's at issue among these two groups is the war generation of the boomers still hold to some of these basic ideas of faith, freedom, and family. And the millennials and Gen Z, you'll see they're beginning to look to the government for solutions. What role will the government play in this kind of situation? And this COVID-19 is a classic example of that, of saying, hey, government, how can you solve our problems, whether it's through a stimulus bill or the like? There are, in fact, fewer givers among the millennials. Now, we hope that will change, but all of this says that we've got a now moment that is coming with respect to the nonprofit world, because there is a significant wealth transfer, but we need to capture it now because of what could be coming in the future. So let me step a little bit further into it. One of the guys that I follow is a guy named George Friedman, and he's written a book, The Storm Before the Calm. He's actually out right now talking about it. It's one of the few books that I've actually read cover to cover, but he talks about the fact that there are a couple things going on in our country today. One is this thing that he calls the institutional cycle, which I would say is basically that question of what's the role of government in our world today? And then the second is what he calls the socioeconomic cycle, which is where are we at socially, where are we at economically? Both of those cycles are going to overlap. And he says we've never had a period in time in the history of our country where we've seen those two cycles so close together. So he would suggest, and this is the same thing that I point to in Charity Shock, is that the next 10 years are going to be pretty turbulent years. We're going to have real questions again about the role of government in our society. We have social issues. that certainly there is angst over. One of the related social issues there is the question about tax exempt status for nonprofits, in particular tax exempt status of organizations that are traditional, that support traditional marriage versus those that do not. And then you have a whole host of economic issues, not the least of which is Social Security and the number of boomers that are going to Social Security. So those larger structural issues say that the next 10 years are going to be very much a period of volatility, not only for the economy and the markets, but for the nonprofit world as well. So part of what our suggestion is how do we begin to address that? So let me put up one more slide here, and then I'll start to dig into some of the deeper issues. This is what Friedman actually points out to the institutional cycles. So you can see that we're heading to the end of the third cycle, and then the socioeconomic cycles, the Reagan cycle, which has produced a lot of cash and available investment into business, but now we're nearing the end of that cycle. Okay, so this is an article that came out just recently, Ed Stetzer, and this is what he says. He says, this is not the crisis. And it's not. This is the calm before the storm, and we pastors and church leaders need a change in mentality. Not all churches will survive this crisis. Now, he's speaking specifically into this narrow window where we're at. The truth is, yes, we're in a difficult period, but there is hope. The key to it is that we as leaders in the country, whether you're with a church or whether you're with a nonprofit, is that we need to take proactive steps in the time that we have in these coming years. So let's dive into some of the things that we're suggesting for folks. So here's where some of the issues are going. More narrowly, for the nonprofit world, we don't know yet what this is going to mean in terms of numbers. What we do know is that as you take a look at past recessions or past difficult times, is that if we have a quicker recovery, then people will say life is back to normal, and you will see some optimism by fourth quarter. If it's a little bit longer than that, then typically the fundraising world goes more slowly than a recovery does. So we may not see the optimism in terms of charitable giving. The flip side of that is that charitable giving never dips as low as the economy or the markets do. So there's still opportunity. But here's what we're trying to say to you. It really isn't business as usual. Some churches certainly are not going to survive if we have the prolonged shutdown. Those that rely upon the offering plate or envelopes are going to have difficulty. Some nonprofits, we've heard this, that they rely upon events, and they've had events cancel, and that's affected them dramatically. That may force some consolidation in the nonprofit world. Point being is you need to be proactive. And that leads to point 2 there, which is really this emphasis on the major donor. And we're going to continue to see that. It's the major donor that's going to continue to carry the opportunity for the nonprofit world in the coming years. The third point there is really seeing that you're fundraising as ministry and mission for you. And it's this idea that your goal is to go out there and build relationships with the people that you're working with and to serve them at a deep level, to create the experience. We'll talk about this in a little bit later, but it is not just a picture ministry. And I can't tell you how necessary that is in this day and age. And I'll give you some examples as we go along. But then it's actually, the fourth thing there is this idea, the need for endowment and reserve. I can't tell you how many ministries over the past 10 years I've told them that this is the time for you to go out and create endowment or reserve funds. And even in this day and age, you can see that some wish they would have followed some of that advice. The fifth point there, and this is the subject of a whole different webinar, but it's the need for earned revenue, for earned income, not just relying upon donations, but to actually create businesses or create revenue opportunity where you earn income and not just rely upon donation income. So that's a little bit of some of our implications. Let's start talking about some practical things that you can do to communicate with your donor world. So one of the first ones there is make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. Now that may seem really basic, but you do actually have a lot of people that are sitting in their houses now because of travel bans and the like, shutdown orders, stay at home issues. So I know that just for myself, my LinkedIn profile, the number of views that I'm getting has gone up dramatically. So I would encourage you that if your LinkedIn profile doesn't have a photo and it doesn't have a summary, doesn't have an explanation of what you're doing, update it, because people are taking a look at you. And if you're going to do some outreach to your donor community, then you need to be mindful of the fact that people are going to look at you sometimes before they call you. LinkedIn is the easiest and the best place for that to take place. Which, by the way, we encourage you all to reach out to both Chris and I on LinkedIn if you're not connected to us. It's one of the ways that you can stay connected to some of the communication that we have coming out on these kind of issues. The second issue there is make sure that you have an online giving platform. Just as one example in the church world today, Generosity by Lifeway, they realized that a lot of churches, because they weren't going to be able to meet, didn't have online giving platforms. So they went out and actually began giving away their donation platform, and they've had hundreds of churches sign up for that. But if you don't have a robust online giving platform, you need to make sure that you get there and get there quickly. All right, so let's dive still a little bit deeper in some of these basic rules of communication. So one of them is simply what I suggested earlier: know the basic facts of COVID-19. When you go out and you have the conversations that we're going to suggest that you have with donors, it's important that you know, hey, here's the basic ground rules of what's really going on. Everybody wants to know the answer to that question. What is going on? So here's our 3 basic ground rules for communication as you communicate. And I think it's great how Kristen started, what's the word on your mind? It is this first idea, be positive. So that verse there, Hebrews 6:19, man, we have a steadfast and sure anchor. We have a hope that we can give and share to people. So just the idea about being positive is just one of the first basic ground rules as to communicate with donors and the people that are around you. But the second ground rule is to be honest. So when you get that question about how are you doing, it is okay to say, man, I have some concerns, or I have some fears, or we lost our big event and I don't know what we're going to do. This is not the time for you to say, I'm just fine. You don't want to do that. You actually want to be honest with them about where you're at, particularly because when you go to the next point is be direct. And this idea of being direct is don't be afraid to ask. Now, again, we're going to give you some more ground rules about what that conversation looks like as you go forward. But the idea of being direct is this idea that you want to be able to come and say, hey, Steve or Susie, I need you to help us. I need you to consider stepping up in this day and age of what we're facing. You see this, by the way, in the biblical example of Paul with the church in Corinth, where he was very direct. You see the whole verse there, but he says, now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. So Paul was not afraid to be direct. So be honest, be direct, but be positive. And all those basic ground rules for communication will allow us to show the light and love of Christ to the people that we talk to. Okay, so here's some tactical fundraising things that we'd like to be able to give to you. One, by the way, it is actually the idea of setting up a reserve fund. Now, this may seem odd in a time where we're thinking, hey, I need current cash. But the idea of setting up a reserve fund is not the idea that you're saying, let's siphon away dollars from our current budget. It's actually the idea that when you go to a major donor, is that you can go to them and say, by the way, we have a reserve fund that we're encouraging people to contribute to now that will allow us to meet current operating needs. So I want to be real clear. It's not the idea that you're going to have this reserve fund that it's just going to allow for future rainy days, but it's simply the idea that you can say, hey folks, we've thought about this, we've got it here, and this is how we're going to get through that. So that allows you to do the direct ask, and it also gives you the connotation of the idea that I need a major gift from you, I need a bigger gift to cover the current potential shortfall that we're facing. One of the other issues, by the way, that I don't have up here that I wanted to add, it's the idea that you should go back and look at the gifts that you have received from donor advised funds. So some of you receive gifts, whether it's from Fidelity, whether it's from Schwab. Hopefully you receive gifts from the Signatory. We want to encourage you certainly in that way. But it may be any other donor advised fund organization. But the idea about why you want to check your database to see who you're receiving gifts from, it's a matter of fact. There's statistical evidence to show that when there's a downturn, that it's the people with donor advised funds that typically actually give more. And so they're actually willing to reach a little bit deeper. When you see the recession occur, you actually see private foundations draw back and corporations draw back. They actually do think about cutting back, but it's actually the donor advised fund world where people will dig deeper. And I know that's going to lead to a whole host of other questions, which is, well, what if I don't know people in the donor advised fund world? Then that's actually what our encouragement is, for you to think about donor advised fund holders as simply another major donor category. Now, again, that's a whole nother webinar that Kristen leads, and she can talk to you more about that, but that's a practical point of suggestion. Okay.
Hey, Bill, quick question came across from a couple of different folks, and if you could speak to this, it's relative to this donor advised fund donor. What about if their charitable money that's sitting in their fund has taken a pretty big hit with the stock market? Do I still go to that donor? How do I engage with them knowing that their balance is likely not what it was a month ago?
Yeah, even though their balance is not what it was a month ago, typically, again, donor advised fund money is invested for the long term. So they are seeking to invest for long term. So they're going to bet that those returns will come back. But still, regardless of that, people who typically have donor advised funds and are people of faith are going to say, I've got some money there, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, even if I've got some loss there, and give out. It's just, again, it's a statistical piece of evidence that we've seen. And then just from a practical experience at the Signatory, our donors typically are always responding. Okay. So second thing there is, we are in a period of lull for many of us, because many of us have had to pull back, whether it's shelter in place orders and the like. Some have had fundraising events cancel. So it's really critical that you prepare your fundraising calendar from now until year end. We're going to squeeze a lot of activity into these next coming months. Now, I'm going to be giving you some activity here in a minute for these next couple months while we're kind of in this period of limbo. But some of the things that you need to be preparing for would be point 3, which is you need to be thinking about key donor gatherings. Those key donor gatherings can be as simple as groups of 10. We can call them salon events, call them key donor events, but it's these simple gatherings where you can bring together 10 families at an event and just say, hey folks, this is our ministry, this is our mission, this is why we want you to come join us. We're continuing to find that particularly in this kind of environment, that peer influence, the peer-to-peer fundraising often occurs really well in that. Certainly there's still the opportunity to do the large president's kind of event, which we know that people like Westfall and the like, they'll have some really large events. I'm sure they're going to have a calendar that'll be crammed full in the fall, but that is one of the basics is you've got to be thinking about that kind of key donor gathering. And again, that's allowing for that peer-to-peer influence. One of the things that the signatory that we have found extremely helpful is being able to go beyond just the ask for the ministry, but to be able to serve the donor in the form of a family legacy event. And the family legacy event is a 24-hour workshop driven around helping a family define their mission, their vision, and their values, the purpose of family, culminated with the idea of how do they live out their generosity. So that family legacy event is one of the simple ones that, again, we found ministries being able to serve their donors and be able to unleash new generosity. The cooperative, Kristen, I'm going to let you talk about that for a little bit.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. So the cooperative is a unique opportunity that the signatory has just developed over the course of the last couple of months. And really it is a focused effort for us to come alongside you as the ministry leader to identify who the candidates are within your donor roles already, who is already giving to you that is a business owner, or perhaps is a real estate investor, someone who has a lot of their wealth generated out of an asset, where there is an opportunity for you and us to vet those candidates and really identify where there might be opportunity. We can go one-on-one and sit down with them and really just educate them about an opportunity to be more generous by leveraging their assets and giving out of their non-cash wealth. So we'll have more information in our follow-up email about that, but you might start considering who might be a fit within your own donor pool, who would be a candidate to connect with us and you in a one-on-one conversation.
Okay, Kristen, so the last point there is preparing now for publicly traded stock donations. Again, that might seem odd with what we've seen the market doing, but again, if going back to one of my earlier slides, if scenario 2 proves to be true, where we're going to see some flattening of the curve and the like, the people in the industry tell us that we're going to see the stock market come back, and it'll come back strong, in which case there will still be an opportunity for publicly traded stock donations. The main thing that you need to be thinking about is, as we see so many ministries prepare their fundraising calendar, they forget to pursue this. And you're going to have to start earlier this year. If in fact that scenario proves itself out, you've got to be thinking, I've got to be starting in September some of my year-end giving communication. You're not going to be able to wait until November for that to happen. And Kristen, I know that we've got a publicly traded stock sheet that we encourage ministries to use as well as a tool to be able to point that out. Okay, let's keep moving forward here because we do want to allow for some time for questions. And this is coming back to my slide about the larger structural issues that we see taking place. And so part of it is there simply is a significant major donor opportunity that's still going on. Notwithstanding the market losses today, there are people who own businesses and they're going to transfer that wealth. And that wealth is in many cases held in the hands of boomers and some of the younger war generations where they're going to sell businesses. You can see, by the way, that if the wealth transfer number still holds true, even if it's dropped by 20 $20 trillion, the number is profound. So for instance, if just 1% of the $68 trillion wealth transfer actually gets accomplished, then $680 billion would be available for charitable giving and ultimately for the sake of the kingdom. This is the opportunity that we need to go after together. This is something we need to be mindful of, because by the way, the problem with the wealth transfer is that when people think about it, they typically are tending to think about universities and hospitals. Now, while that's not bad in and of itself, we want to see more of this wealth transfer come to kingdom causes so that we can advance the gospel around the globe. So what does that mean? What do we need to do? So right now, this is a right now issue. And so even on our own team, we've said to not only our board, but our staff, but we want to make sure that you are addressing proactively communication with the folks that you work with, the people that you serve. So on our team level, you see there, point 2, we are encouraging our folks to do the 5-10-10 goal. 5 text messages, 10 emails, 10 phone calls or Zoom call with their donor audience. And this includes not only people that they're close to, but it includes potential donors. And that basic communication plan of just being in front of people is one of the really simple things that you can do right now. 5-10-10. So even this morning, even before I was getting ready for this webinar, I sent my 5 text messages. I sent my 10 emails. Haven't made my 10 phone calls yet, but that's still to come. Even in the early days of doing this, by the way, here's the encouragement for you all. One of my text messages, actually one of my first days of doing this text message, heard from a donor that I hadn't heard from for a while. And he's like, man, we need to get on the phone and I want to chat with you. I want to catch up with what you're doing. And I know that he has capacity and opportunity. One of my emails was out to a guy that I hadn't talked to. He had a donor advised fund with us. And it turns out he's actually in a business that is in the medical arena, and they're doing extremely well. They're actually probably moving towards a transaction. That same guy, by the way, just as a result of us jumping on a phone call, having this exchange, sent me an email today and said, by the way, I need to introduce you to this friend of mine who I think that you guys would be able to help. So this 5-10-10 rule of just being out in front of the of your people makes a huge difference. Now, what does that messaging look like? One of the messages is simply, how are you doing? What do you think about all this craziness? If any of you know me at all, you know that a lot of my email messages are pretty short, and that's usually my first question is, how are you doing? And that's a really important question. I sent an email out to a guy that his business, I thought, actually would be doing extremely well because of the nature of what they do. They actually are in the food industry, but it turns out that the food that they provide is to restaurants. They're not doing quite as well. So it was really important to ask that question, how are you doing? But then a few practical questions is, so what adjustments are you making as an organization? How are you adjusting? What's your outlook? But then as you think about those things, flip those 2 points around for yourself as well. It's important for the donor community to understand that you are making adjustments. For some organizations, it actually might mean that you've had to lay off some people. It might mean that you've had to make some staff adjustments and the like. But it's important for the donor community to know that you're being proactive and not just waiting. We've actually heard positive comments from some of the donor community that we're talking to that are extremely pleased that we are being aggressive out there with the communication that we're having. Now, one thing too, in this kind of environment, it's important to realize truly that some people aren't going to be able to give. They've been hurt and it's going to be hard for them. The flip side of that is there are still enough people that are doing well. You'll see in any kind of environment like this that there are businesses that are doing well. There are people that, whether they have private foundations or they have money in their bank account, money in a donor advice fund, they are still ready to help. So don't be afraid to ask and don't apologize. That's just one of the basic ground rules, is that when you lean into those 3 basic rules that I talk about be positive, be honest, and at the same time be direct. That's really basic messaging. This is not a time to be afraid. This is actually a time to actually be more aggressive in the communication that you have. Pretty basic ground rules. And I guarantee you that if all of the folks on this call would be aggressive with this kind of communication, this is one of the ways that we would show the light and love of Christ in a time where there's just been a lot of panic. Okay, so a couple other practical things that I want you to be thinking about is, how do you actually reach the major donor in this time? That is obviously one of the key opportunities right now. So what is the major donor going to be thinking about? The major donor is going to be thinking about expense reduction. So even if they're in a business that's doing well, this kind of environment creates its own level of fear and panic among anyone. And so they're thinking, how do I manage my expenses so I can continue to do well? Well, what's one of the most manageable expenses that we get to help that donor audience with? It's income tax. And that's why your year-end giving calendar, your year-end fundraising calendar makes such a big difference. So the simple idea is that people can be able to give assets, publicly traded stock, they can give ownership interest in businesses, and still be able to drive their income tax down in favor of more giving. Again, Kristen will be able to point you to resources that we utilize in that way, but it's this simple proposition: help the business owner with the thing that they're concerned about, which is income tax reduction. Second, there are still business sales that are taking place. Some of those business sales were set up long before this whole COVID-19 thing came to play. Those business sales are going to be taking place, and they're going to have closings. I can't tell you how many different closings that I'm aware of right now that represent major gift opportunity for you. So one of the questions that you need to be asking among your major donors is, how's the business going? But what might you be doing with that business? What are you going to do with it in the future? Are you looking at a sale? Are you looking at an exit at some point in time in the future? It's the ministry that's asking that kind of question that can potentially capture a significant gift on behalf of the ministry. A couple other points, and I know we'll start to turn it towards questions, but it is this idea of, this actually is a good time for major gift or endowment kind of opportunity. And again, it goes back to this reserve fund idea. People want to know that you're thinking proactively about the future. And so the fact that you may have an account, this is why we have a number of ministries set up these single charity funds, and they call it, our ministry foundation or our ministry endowment. This is the way we need to be thinking. And again, if you go back to some of my thoughts about what the next 10 years hold, the ministries that have endowments or reserve accounts that are actually able to cover them in these volatile times are the ones that are going to be able to have the most positive message going forward. Put on your calendar these major donor gatherings, whatever they look like. I can't stress that enough. And then lastly, this is a piece that we told you we'd cover, and it's the financial advisor. So if I told you that you should have the 5-10-10 rule, 5 text messages, 10 emails, 10 phone calls, out of that, you should really be thinking about 2 to 3 of those should be going out to financial advisors, with the idea being that you're going to have 2 to 3 phone calls a week with financial advisors. Now, why financial advisors? Because financial advisors are oftentimes the people who are sitting down with that donor at year end and saying, hey, Joe and Sally, it looks like you have some gain in XYZ stock. And so we ought to think about making a gift of that stock. Well, that financial advisor if he has a relationship with a particular ministry, you might say, by the way, one of the ministries that you might want to consider. Financial advisors are in many cases gatekeepers for some of the charitable giving that their clients do. So that's one of the reasons why we say just be practical about that. Again, one of the things that you can do within your database is you can go dive into taking a look at who are some of the financial advisors within that database. Okay, Kristen, I know that I'm going to stop there for a moment, but let me sum up with the simple idea of this is the time to go and communicate. It's the time to communicate with your donor audience, to be positive, be honest, but at the same time to say, let's be direct, and then look proactively at gathering your donors around a message of this mission that we're out there to win, not only for this year, but in years to come as well. So Kristen, let's take some questions.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Hey, I've gotten a couple of questions about more information on business sale and giving charitably before a sale. We have more resources. So rather than spend a lot of time on that today, that can be a different webinar entirely, but we will share some of those resources with you and address it at a later opportunity in a webinar. If
Hey,
what
Kristen,
we share with you, go ahead, Bill.
let me address that, by the way, too, is that next week, we'll actually be doing a webinar right about this time, in fact, with financial advisors, and we will go deeper into the business sale, business gift kind of opportunity. So some of these ministries might want to be pointing their advisors to that, but certainly they're welcome to participate as well if they want to go deeper on these subjects.
Absolutely. Great idea. And I will include that, folks, in our follow-up. One of the questions that we got, Bill, is how does the stimulus that the government is discussing and passing impact our charitable kingdom work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. One of the first things that we saw is that there were a group of 50 nonprofits that went out and said that they wanted part of the stimulus package. They wanted $60 billion. I don't think that made it as part of the package at all yet. But one of the things that could happen, and I've actually put this out as a topic on LinkedIn, is there are some people who are going to be getting stimulus checks in from the federal government. And to be honest, they don't need it. And they actually could make a charitable gift of that. So that's an opportunity out there, the stimulus checks that are out there. You are going to see some of these businesses that are going to get some of their cash back, if you will. And so they're going to be able to continue on. And so that goes back to this point about, man, you just need to stay in front of the people that you're with, because if you keep communicating, then we should be able to see those gifts continue to flow.
Yeah, very good. Okay, another question for you. What do you think about multi-year commitments at this time? Do you press into those and emphasize them, or pause on any kind of multi-year ask?
Well, my view is don't shrink back. And if you've got momentum, if you had that kind of conversation, absolutely. And there's still this idea in the place and time that we're at, because we're a people of faith, that you can lean into people and say, you really truly can say, I need you here with me right now. Now you're going to be able to address and say, hey, I know there's fear on your part, but let's just go ahead and take that step. And we've continued to see it. I think we'll continue to see that kind of opportunity of multi-year commitments as a way to not only exhibit faith, but to support the ministry and mission that people are a part of.
Okay, how about engaging donors in virtual context, like a Zoom call or a small event virtually? Do you have thoughts on the effectiveness or whether or not that is a good methodology for some key major donors?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one reason why we said that we wanted the 5-10-10 rule, is that the idea is that you should be having phone calls, and as many of them as possible by Zoom. So in 2 weeks, right before Good Friday, we're planning to do a Zoom call with our donor audience. And part of the purpose of that is it's as simple as saying, let's build some community among the people that we work with. That maybe it'd be hard. I mean, we work with donors all across the country. We've got people from Seattle to Florida. And so sometimes it's hard to get them together in a single place, but you can do it by Zoom. And it's one of those safe places, say, I can participate in that. Part of the key that as you do that, though, is again, don't make it just about yourself as a ministry. Make sure that you give good content that says this is helpful for you, some new information that says this is maybe helpful to your family. So that's what we encourage ministries to be thinking about, regardless of whether it's in person or by Zoom.
So on the the charity fund, or the reserve fund, as we've referred to it, one question has come in. We already have that currently in our bank account. We have a separate bank account as our savings account. Why would we need to move that, or what's the advantage of a charity fund?
The single charity fund for some donors is the idea being that they want to know that the money actually isn't in the checking account, that where it can be siphoned off and used for purposes other than what it was originally set up for. Now, if that is one thought behind that. The single charity fund can be used in multiple ways too. So we've encouraged a number of ministries just to call it their ministry foundation. But the idea, whether you call it the reserve fund, the single charity fund, or the ministry foundation, and by having it set up as a specific designated account, what it truly does, it allows you this opportunity to go out and say, we've got this ministry foundation set up, and we have now the ability to receive major gifts through it. One of the opportunities, of course, when ministries partner with the signatory is that we partner with them to receive gifts of real estate. We help them receive these complex business asset kind of gifts. So it just extends the number and kinds of gifts that you can receive. And the whole idea behind it ultimately is this idea, let's connote the bigger idea. That's the idea of the ministry foundation reserve fund kind of idea.
Bill, we talked a little bit in our promo of this that we were going to talk about monthly giving and how to really make that sustainable and continue to strengthen that effort. What are your suggestions to those on the call that are interested in that monthly program?
Yeah, on the monthly giving side of things, one, of course, is this is where the online giving platform is really critical. So make sure that you've got an online giving platform that allows for recurring gifts. If you don't, you need to revisit that. We know just from all the research, whether it's Notre Dame or Stanford, that when you get people making gifts to you systematically on a monthly kind of basis, they think they're generous and they become more generous ultimately. So the online platform is kind of the first step. But for some of the ministries that are perhaps in the earlier stage, but even, if you've been around a while, this is a good time to actually go back and say, I need to do some refresh of my direct mail and make sure that we've shored up all those people that are current givers, but then lapse givers. This is the time to do it. It's sometimes in these times of crisis that people say, oh yeah, I need to do that. Even my wife and I, we're looking at a couple ministries right now that we say, we need to support them because they're going to need our help in this time. So again, this is, don't take on the panic of the world. Instead, go back out and reach out and say, man, this is actually a good time to add some new donors.
Okay, one last question. Do you anticipate any impact on charitable giving with the delay of the tax filing deadline?
I really don't. I think that's irrelevant for most people today. I think what the biggest issue in terms of how all this, the tax filings, et cetera, the biggest issue will ultimately be if the scenario 2 that I talked about proves to be true and the market comes back, It's just a question of how quickly that all happens. If that happens and people begin to feel positive again, it's the emotion of this as much as anything that's going to drive the charitable giving. So when we see that happen, which I do believe it will happen, I don't want to be the false prognosticator, but I believe we're going to see some good news in the coming weeks. Maybe it won't be in the next week, but in the weeks after that, we'll see that. We'll actually see an opportunity for charitable giving to grow and increase. At the same time I say that, I can't drive home enough this idea of the emphasis on the major donor and being out in front of it with the communication that needs to go on a day-by-day, week-by-week kind of basis.
Very good. All right, thanks, Bill. Thanks for sharing your insights. We do want to leave you with a few takeaways here. So next steps and resources, like we said at the beginning, we want this to be practical information for you. I know we did not get to all of your questions, and we will do that. So count on us to send out to you some answers to those questions. Those will be sent out to everyone. If you don't get your question answered, please email me directly and we will get an answer for you. Relative to next steps here, please subscribe to both. Our Signatory newsletter talks a lot about generosity, family relationships, and really continuing to fund the causes that donors care the most about. And subscribe to our ministry newsletter. That is one that we really focus on equipping you and giving you resources for donor interactions. Bill has his own newsletter. The link is there. And then we have a charity fund information, also so we have the application for that, certainly on our website, but some of those benefits and the why this is important and how you market this to your donors. We have a piece on that we will also be sharing with you, as well as the asset gift information. We have some communication keys. You know, Bill ran through those fairly quickly. Some of the responses you guys were giving in the chat indicate that you are doing that. Keep in mind, you have a fairly captive audience, right? Your donors are mostly at home. They don't have the meetings they once did. So engaging with them via text, via email, via phone calls should be certainly more productive than perhaps it had been before much of the country was in a stay-at-home order. Publicly traded stock and major donor gatherings. If you want more information about those things, please send me an email. We'll set up a time to talk and we can connect about what those different ideas look like. I know that that is not a one-size-fits-all, and we certainly want to help you customize what that might look like best for your organization. And if there's a place for us to add value into that conversation with those major donors, then we certainly are willing to do that as well. And then finally, there is the book that Bill and Ray Gary wrote, and it is available on Amazon. Again, all of these resources and links to them will be sent out in a follow-up email. It will include a recording of today's information, and please keep that line of communication open. The Signatory is here to equip you and to partner with you in these major donor conversations and in the effort to see radical generosity impact the work that you are doing. So stay tuned, keep your eyes peeled for that email follow-up, and we continue to be for you. We want to see you succeed and continue to be successful in your cause area. So thanks so much for tuning in today. Again, keep that line of communication open. Whatever questions you may have, don't hesitate to reach out. God bless your work.